r/ask Reddit. Workers who got their bosses fired? How? Management was giving an injured worker crap, not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. The worker said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you will be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." The worker called the Environmental Protection Agency and told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation. All because you wanted to freak with one poor idiot. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. People came to her for help to raise money for nonprofits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago, before social workers were more of a mandatory thing in high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So, my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused to take any of it and said the position just wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party, and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said that it was such a shame that principal didn't want to take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he had ordered principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one is interested in that and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position, and whenever we came back from the holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. Worked as a register for a tour company. I also had a manager who freaking hated me for some reason. She was probably the benchiest person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for no reason. Got on to me about answering questions a new hire had. Wrote down I was 30 minutes late for a shift when I was 2 minutes late. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from our tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer, because we would get pay docked if we were even $1 off. So if a customer had 23 and change, I'd count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them, so I knew I'd given back the right amount. We also had cameras pointing at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till and they were going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at the cameras because I counted out all my bills for customers. Lo and behold, Benchy Bench was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Freak you, Jennifer. I won. I've told it before. Not fired, but transferred. Had a squad leader make us all stand out in the Missouri winter, soaking wet, until someone volunteered for weekend duty. I told him I had previous cold weather injuries. He ignored it. The corporal saw my blue feet when I took off my boots and sent me to the aid station. The doctor lost his crap, and that squad leader was in another company the next day. It's not as justice bonering as getting a jerk fired, but it's the army. That's not gonna happen. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial sexual abuser of female clients and criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for the other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over 6 months, presented my evidence, and got him disbarred. Advanced through the company through hard work and dedication, and slowly began to usurp the boss's duties and responsibilities. Eventually, the owner realized what a lazy schmuck the old boss was and laid him off. A week later, I got a new title and a 35% raise. Mine is pretty pedestrian but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there for a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I've been doing. We lost our sales manager 1 year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person, She was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt and dismissive, and that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause, talked crap about anyone not in the room, and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach a jerk horticulturist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. What with one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of HR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews. Only managers did, and everyone at my store knew why I was leaving. So there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one. And he never said anything about it. But I knew. He set it up so I could tell the head of HR that I was leaving because of Flora. And I did. I just laid into her. I said that Flora was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company, during which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day, and all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me then or since. I used to work at a title company and witnessed our department manager forge mortgage documents on a fairly regular basis. So when she went to upper management to throw the entire department under the bus for being behind on recording documents, I marched straight to HR to resign and let them know what she was doing. She was fired, and they called me and offered my job back before the week was out. For a while, I was project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just could not be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, how we bent over for them. Our programs director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure or quitting outright due to burnout. And he was benching that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as a general dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact had reputation were good employees had failed. A week later, I heard that the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. By doing so much, it started an investigation into what they were actually doing during their day. Officially, she was fired for sending nudes through corporate email, but the only reason they were tracking her email was to understand what she was spending her time on. Turns out, it was an affair. I used to be a store manager at a sporting goods store in a mall. One of my co-managers was freaking one of my underage teenage employees regularly in the back rooms after the store closed. This was going on for several months. I found out when the said teenager came to me and she said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about the sex in the stockroom. I had to call the police and corporate about this. We arranged a sting with the help of the girl, as she acted out for the police to meet up with my co-manager after work. Basically, caught him with his pants down, to use the term. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the freak off the ice. Some butthead decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I feel okay." Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration because I felt there should be some sort of documentation in case, God forbid, I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. My boss was fired by my next shift. I tried to quit because I was sick of my boss's crap. On my way home, the company's president called to talk to me about what had happened. He offered me an extra 2 weeks of paid vacation and promised she would be gone when I came back. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one programming mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said that I wanted to do back-end work. He replied and said, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead, I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I was out to lunch with a few coworkers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and had some of the stuff he had done or said to them, mostly just rude things, so I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within a few days, he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later, and I loved it. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him, just the last person. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't. In months. She and my director ordered me and my co-workers to do our chart audits, fill out the forms, and they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision, staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us, and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support, and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing and their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope. So I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day, and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what happened at the interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was still on the board of the previous agency, so she called her and I told her everything too. Director was fired, and the supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had killed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards, I heard. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Our manager spent the whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other, she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time, I left my water bottle at the front counter and my coworker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She would make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired, and found out she may have been stealing or giving away products. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. The supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place but different departments, and my supervisor would make sexual comments about threesomes with him. What hotel we picked for our afternoon delight? Crap like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Turns out his boss was disgusted, told his boss who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff, they corroborated what I said, they checked the security cameras, saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking, and was fired. When he was told, he guessed that I was the person who complained and tried to get me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my coworker surrounding me as he was walled out. That was a lovely ending to it all. I had a boss who refused to make accommodations for a disabled coworker, refused to keep other staff in line, and basically let the disabled worker fall behind and get picked on because she felt like she was not required to do anything else. I worked for a local government agency and reported it to our HR and upper management. After they did nothing, I contacted them again to let them know I would be filing a suit with the ACLU for ADA violations. My boss was gone in 2 weeks, and the rest of the staff had mandatory ADA training. I used math to prove to their superior how severely my boss had underestimated a turnover of 3 years in a row, costing a ton of money and labor issues. One day earlier, the boss had screamed at my team until his face went purple, making a huge spectacle in front of the entire floor. The gist was that we were colluding against the company by electing not to renew our contracts. Came back with graphs and math, baby. He was demoted and transferred out a couple of weeks later. He was always slacking off. He'd go and do a 15-minute task and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40s and vaguely knew him anyway. So I was not standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak to him about it. AM rang in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today, and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something to do, but his boss said, nope, need you in the shop. Somehow he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The AM came down and he was gone. My manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. AM was ticked. At the end of the day, when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. I had proven myself as a competent management level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, set schedules nobody could work, and all around didn't give a crap as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in. After all, she was the assistant manager, so why wouldn't she be promoted? We both got called into a meeting. The district uppity-up told us both that I was going to be the new manager and she lost her crap. I never saw her again. And quickly after that, all her relatives that worked there also quit. She was hired as a new director. Didn't know much of anything about what she claimed she did. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she stated that her boss would sign anything she put in front of him because he didn't know what it was. Oops. Was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing. On quiet nights, if she thought she wasn't asking enough on tips, she would go to the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables that were paid in cash, pocketing the money. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers would just never add up to what I was being sold. So I got a hold of the software company that ran the computer system, and it turns out they have a backdoor that even management can't see that locks every single keystroke. Turns out she had ripped off close to $20,000 over 6 months. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason, the owner didn't bother to press charges. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift went overly long. Instead of turning into my street, he went to a bar about a mile in the opposite direction so we could get to know each other. I had one drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second drink. I asked to go home again and he tried to assault me. The details aren't important. Let's just say he was pretty aggressive. I emailed the owner of the restaurant about what had happened and went to my shift the next day. The owner was outside the restaurant firing the manager, all on the word of a brand new employee he'd never even met. I was so impressed, and the rest of the workers were very grateful for the change. That restaurant was a great place to work. 2 years later, I started my first day at my dream restaurant, did some training, sat down for pre-shift with the kitchen, and who comes out to present the specials? It's Leo, of course. He sees me and freezes up. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I went straight to my new manager and say I have a history with the current employee that they need to know about. I told my story, I showed emails between the owner and myself. They talked to Leo about it. He was fired again. We worked in a really specialized food style, where chefs circulate through all the restaurants. He later applied to work for me when I was hiring the manager, and didn't get a call back, obviously. I am out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him for the rest of his professional life. Not fired, but moved stores and demoted. He posted publicly on his Facebook asking why so many of his staff have mental problems. He also posted a few weeks before that he was having a cheeky snow day and skipping work. I reported it myself. Considering I had been on final written warning for breaking the social media policy, I don't see why he shouldn't be either. I worked in a bar and I caught my supervisor giving her and her friends free drinks and taking bottles home. They reviewed the CCTV and found she was also dealing drugs from behind the bar, and she was fired the next day. I didn't get him fired per se, but something I was involved in did. I was testing welds in the bullnose area of a power boiler, and basically a 20-foot piece of steel boiler tube with a 5/8 inch membrane welded to each side so it looked like a huge axe fell and just about chopped me in half. I reported the incident to my boss, the night shift supervisor, and he said he would take care of it. I had to fill out a report myself, which I handed off to the safety lead when he showed up in the morning. My boss never reported anything. He lost his job for mishandling the situation. It wasn't his first strike. I quit. I went through everything in my exit interview, how my reviews were always crap so she didn't have to give me a raise, but that I had emails telling me how great the same work was throughout the year, how I was written up because someone heard me say something mean. She couldn't tell me what it was because she wouldn't repeat it. HR never heard anything about it. She also did that write-up by herself. instead of with another member of management per the company handbook. She also told me to work 80 hours a week just because she wanted me to, or that I should find a new job. I refused to, and then I got a job within the week and turned in my 2 weeks. I also talked about how she threatened my job because I found out about her and a few other people changing reports to get them all of their bonuses. I got to meet with everyone about the crap she was pulling, except for the people that were in on the editing of reports. I met with the COO, CFO, VP of HR, and all of the legal team. After I left, she was immediately moved to a new department and then let go within 3 months. Also, the people that were changing reports were either let go or demoted. I do feel bad for leaving that job though. Within the year, that department was fully let go. So, my friends all lost their jobs. I had a boss who was skimming off employee hours at Walmart. I took screenshots of my employees' hours on the Thursday before the shift started, and then screenshots of their hours on Friday that showed that all of them had a couple hours skimmed off their work week. I was a low-level manager, and he was an upper-tier manager. He got fired. I believe his motivation was that he wanted to get promoted and wanted to show that he could get more done in fewer man-hours. Probably would have impacted his bonus too. Not my manager, but I got a project manager who worked with my team fired when it was obvious he didn't understand the business domain and put no work into understanding it or even breaking down the problems with the team. During a stakeholder meeting, we were asked about the game plan for tackling the project. He spewed some nonsense and I asked what the actual plan was in detail. When he tried to come up with bullcrap to explain that the problem is very complex and there is no clear path to building the project, that sealed his fate. I told my supervisor that my direct boss was stealing so much product and time from the store. I knew it. Her stories didn't add up. She was never helping us on the floor, always in her office, would take 1.5 hours lunch breaks and not clock out, leave early, tell me she was coming in early when the store didn't open until 9, which I knew was crap because she didn't have a store key. I told them for about 8 months. No one followed up on it. I didn't get her fired per se, but I basically made her unable to get rehired or not able to use us as a reference. I got promoted to her position after she left, and I found thousands of dollars worth of empty boxes shoved in the back of her desk drawers. I'm sure she was taking cash from the register too. I worked for a pharma company and my supervisor was always a dick to me. On one of my annual reviews, he put that I had changed the parameters on one of our pieces of equipment so that it was out of spec. It's a lot more complicated, but I refused to sign my review and basically proved that it didn't happen. Now everything was documented there, including our reviews, and him submitting false information on my review was a fireable offense. I ended up quitting right after I got him fired because basically everyone there was crap like that. I can't take credit for getting him fired, but I have a good story. My former manager was a bloody moron. None of my coworkers liked him. He was rude, a bully, and didn't know what he was doing. I made an HR complaint a few months after starting there. Found out from long-term workers that he had many reports on his file already for various things, including harassment. One day, we were just told he wouldn't be back. He was there the day prior. The complaint that finally got him fired didn't come from me. But you'll love this. In February, he was casually speaking with a Chinese employee about coronavirus, and the manager referred to COVID-19 as Kung Flu. The employee complained and asked for an apology. The manager refused to even apologize, saying that the employee could quit if he didn't want to work for him. Employee quit and the manager was fired after several years at the company. I work for the federal government and we have a yearly review for all employees to fill out where you can rank your management. Enough people complained that it caught someone's attention and they sent in auditors to investigate. Our boss was incompetent and cost us the necessary funding because they simply weren't doing their job. What got them fired in the end though was time fraud. Auditors found it when doing the general investigation about the complaint. We were facing layoffs after the tech bubble burst. I told upper management I would take the severance package, but that I really enjoyed working there and they should feel free to call me if they changed their minds. When it became clear that my manager was just having me all her work and without me she wasn't doing squat right, they let her go and brought me back. I even got to keep the severance, so I got double paid for a couple of weeks. That was really nice. Moral of the story, don't burn bridges unless they lead to Jerktown. In which case, light that freaker up. Our hotel was undergoing a full renovation. During this time, both my managers were putting in less than 30 hours a week, and I was racking up to 70 hours doing their jobs as well. I'm ambitious and knew it would look great on my resume, so I was happy to bust my butt. 2 months in, and I started to notice things going missing, like furniture, funds allocated by corporate, and just general bullcrap. Found out both my managers were pocketing the $20K in discretionary funds allocated to us when I overheard a conversation in the back office. Reported them to corporate and an investigation was launched. 2 days later on a Friday, I had been put on suspension for misconduct by our district manager, and Monday, 9 a.m., I was told to clean out my office. I was burnt out at this point, so I took it as a victory, filed a retaliation lawsuit, and moved states. 6 months later, everyone is getting fired. Charges have been pressed on the 2 managers. I'm back here eating popcorn, sad that I was great at my job but can never work for that company again. He confided in me that he was banging a staff member, told me he would stop. About a year later, he's still doing it and everyone pretty much knows. He keeps promoting her. I sent in a few anonymous tips to HR, which led to a few investigations and ultimately his dismissal. My boss got fired on their own decisions. I just happened to be there. I worked at a drugstore in the US in the early 2000s and controlled substances were going missing from the pharmacy. My district management team called me in and asked if I had any idea who was taking the pills. I did not. I realized much later that asking the assistant manager this instead of the manager should have tipped me off immediately that the manager was the suspect. The next night I closed the store, and loss prevention installed extra cameras in the store and pharmacy. I was the only store employee who knew about these cameras, and I went in early or stayed late every day to change the tapes. It wasn't great. No real days off. Shortly after, the manager went on leave for family medical reasons and the pill counts were no longer off. It seemed pretty obvious at that point, but 2 pharmacy techs were also out at the time, so the investigation continued. The manager came back from their leave and they were caught on camera entering the store early, entering the pharmacy without a pharmacist present, which was very illegal. Then unlocking the controlled substances cabinet. The video did not actually show the manager taking the pills, but the pill count was off from the day before. Again, seemed obvious. The manager was called into the district office the day I delivered the tapes to the district loss prevention team. The manager was suspended pending a formal investigation, then subsequently fired. So, in the sense that I managed the day-to-day of changing videotapes on secret cameras, I got my boss fired. Here's hoping they are dealing with their painkiller addiction and no longer making bad decisions. Every person in my department filed multiple complaints about our incompetent director. CEO finally got the message it would be cheaper and easier to fire and replace him than it would be to fire and replace all 50 of us. Unfortunately, the guy that replaced the crappy former director was not an improvement. So I found a better job and quit. My current boss is awesome. My manager, who also managed a few other direct reports, was incompetent. He made it through his interview rounds and was hired by the skin of his teeth, and also that we're in an industry that doesn't necessarily have a lot of candidates. He played that to his advantage. He made it a year or 2 before the foundation started to crumble on his smokescreen. He then had a personal event come up in his life and he was unable to juggle his work and personal lives. He simply couldn't keep up the charade while also taking care of whatever was going on at home. The trust of his workers was already crumbling. Then his event happened and it all fell apart from there. Long story short, his direct reports cataloged nearly everything he did and told us, and staged something of a mini mutiny. He was a great person but a terrible manager, and collections were not being done properly. So we risked in the future not getting paid. It took several months and we all did our jobs, but he was eventually let go. It was not as easy as an employee working for him. It was no longer a working with relationship to move the company forward, but everything was delegated out and he took no responsibility for anything. Always losing emails, dropped promises, late for meetings, the list goes on. At the end of the day, we needed someone who could lead, and he wasn't it.